was a period of time where I was the #1 philosophy podcast in Lebanon. And I don't know if that just says something about podcasting, the environment of podcasting in Lebanon more than the actual popularity of my show or not.
Interesting. But do you know what your name means, Joel Bouchard, in Arabic? Do you know what that means?
No idea.
Sai, do you want to translate or should I do it?
No, you go for it, man.
Joel means like weather, and Bouchard means popcorn. So I don't know what that relates to it. But yeah, pretty much. Am I right or am I wrong, Saeed?
Yeah, you're right, man. 100%.
That's cool. I've never heard of names being translated into other languages. Now I'm really curious what it is in a lot of other languages.
Yeah, well, I only know
what languages
Arabic.
Do you speak, Joel?
English. That's it. My name's French, and I live close to the Canadian border. So anytime I'm up there, they always try to speak French to me. Hey man, my ancestors came from Canada to the U.S. like 400 years ago, so I don't know any French, but
okay,
yeah,
they didn't
no, it's just English for me.
They just crossed the border.
Yeah. They, as soon as they could get as many pelts as they needed to buy their way, I think they crossed over. I'm not sure what the exact history was there, but.
Oh my goodness. Joel, you know what language you also speak? The language of music, many instruments, right? You just released your album, right? All We Are?
Yeah.
How incredible.
Yep.
Not everyone has an album, but you do. That's pretty cool. You know what else you do
true.
have, Joel? You're a doctoral student. You have your own podcast, From Nowhere to Nothing. You were a vet, an Army veteran.
Yep.
What else? And now you're here on this podcast today. Sharing your thoughts on philosophy, psychology. And I had some questions prepped for you. And I was hoping we can have an open and honest conversation with each other.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, Joel, how's your love life like nowadays?
Good. I've been married for 12 years next month. So,
congrats.
Yeah. I'd say
it's holding up. Yeah.
yeah. Things are still going pretty well. So
that's pretty good.
No complaints.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I'm also been seeing someone. I've been dating someone for the past 3 to 4 years. So that's also really good. Thanks for asking. As for Saeed, honestly, we're trying to help him find someone, but I think we've run out of human beings that Saeed can match with. So I'm wondering about artificial intelligence. What do you think? You think artificial intelligence is a place where you can find love?
Yeah. So if you ask my friends refer to me as the robot. So if you ask them, it's already happening. My wife is already married to an artificially intelligent robot. But no, yeah. So this is a big thing that's been popping up in the media recently is, with advancements in AI, you see these alarmist headlines like, young men are being ruined on normal relationships by, artificial intelligence girlfriends and stuff. It's a really interesting thing from a psychological standpoint. This idea, can you form an emotional attachment to something that is not human in such a way that it could damage your human relationships? I think the answer to that is probably an unequivocal yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would an AI be able to take the role of a girlfriend or a spouse long term? It's kind of hard, and with the technological limitations we currently have, there's no way of embodying the AI, if you know what I mean. Speaking of love life, but
so I have no hope.
So, well, I'd say give the technology 10 or 15 years, maybe. But yeah, in the short term, you might want to stick with the humans. I'm not.
God damn it, man! Humans are so freaking complicated. They don't make things simple when it comes to this situation. Or maybe I'm making it too complicated. I don't know. Like, how does one differentiate between that? How does someone know if it's just simple or if it's not?
Yeah. You hit on it, which is that humans are complicated. Mm-hmm. There's a number of reasons for that. Most of it, if you were to ask me, a philosopher, the reason I would give you for that is because life doesn't make sense and it's hard to try to find the meaning in it, right?
Yeah.
So I have a philosophy podcast and I'm working on a doctorate in psychology. So right there's an interesting conundrum because philosophy as an abstraction comes from the human psychology. We need brains in order to think about philosophy. But then on the other hand, psychology comes directly from philosophy, because postulating about the machinations of the human brain is what causes us to develop a scientific theory of how it works. So right there, you got a feedback loop. It's a circular thing that really, where's the beginning and where's the end of it? Relationships are the same way, right? When trying to determine, whether it's simple or complex, or whether the other person is the one being difficult, or whether you're the one being difficult, it's really hard to parse apart from our own subjective viewpoint. There's no objective observer telling you what's wrong. Your friend might think that it's you, but he's known you for years, so he's just gonna, he might be honing in on your flaws or trying to give you a hard time. But the best thing you can do is just, try to imagine the other person's perspective as objectively as you can. I have a couple of relationships, friendships that are tough, right? Because as a robot, I'm a lot different from most people, and I have friends that experience emotions and express them, and that's very difficult for me. So I have to kind of put myself in the role of what would it be like to be a human and actually have emotions that I want to express, and work it out that way. And so that helps, trying to put yourself in somebody else's view, somebody else's perspective, and see, and sometimes when you do that, you will find out, oh, okay, it's me. Yeah, I'm the weird one. I'm the one that's screwing up. And then with that insight, you can kind of adjust some of your behavior to make things easier. Sometimes when you do that, you realize that the other person is just crazy, and you might be better off looking for different candidates.
But if you're the robot in this situation, Joel, how did you get a wife? What are the moves that you did?
She asked me out.
Aha.
So that's how that went. Yeah.
So sometimes
fun fact,
robot needs someone to make the first move.
Yes. Every relationship I've ever had, the girl made the first move. So it pays to be handsome. If you're handsome, then, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. They'll come find you. But
being a multi-instrumentalist too. Oh wow.
Yeah, being talented, it helps. Being funny helps. Being rich helps. I'm not rich, but I hear it helps. There's a lot of scientific evidence that proves it out. But
how do you learn all the things that you know? I mean, you know a lot of things, right? And you have many hobbies too. So why and how?
Yeah. So I think with philosophy, the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know anything, right? That's a famous philosophical quote. It's the same thing. I think it's just born out of being curious about stuff. Rather than going through life, just kind of with your blinders on, saying, all right, I woke up, I'm going to eat breakfast, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to come home, I'm going to hang out and watch TV, I'm going to go to bed. Just kind of stopping and looking at things and going, oh, this is weird. When I look up at the sky at nighttime, there's no ceiling. Like, what? It sounds like I'm on drugs, but that's like a legitimately interesting question, right? Like, oh, wow, geez, like I'm just looking up and I'm seeing millions of years into the past. That's weird. Why, what's going on? And there's a lot of things like that. I like carrying around a handheld microscope and just looking at bugs and leaves and stuff. And, so it's just it's a mindset thing, right? I think that if you perceive ordinary things as being very interesting, then they are. So
wow.
It can help you just kind of, and if you're interested in anything, you'll find time to be invested in it and learn about it. And just like that, you've accumulated a lot of knowledge and hobbies about a bunch of various random things.
Just curiosity, right? And love of life.
Yep.
I mean, I feel like sometimes life can be a bit dark. There's a lot going on, and now I feel like we have access to many things, and I'm just horrified every day, every time I look at the news. And it's easy to get sad and cry.
Right, yeah. And I was just talking about this on 2 different podcasts that I did. And one was with a guy that was a guest on my show. He was another psychologist, and the theory that he developed was around our access to technology and how that's really affected us in a big way because, media tends to focus on negative events and represent them as being bigger and more frequent than they really are. And then social media puts you in an echo chamber. So you take these dark events and then you're just surrounded with people telling you a story. And sometimes it's hard to get outside that story. Whereas, I was born before the internet was real prevalent, right? And so my idea of the world was a lot more localized. It was what was going on in my town, what was going on with my friends or my family or that sort of thing. And what we talked about as from the psychological standpoint is, again, that idea of perspective, right? If your perspective is this global thing that's focused on negative events, you're going to have a bad time, right? But if you're focusing on the things you can control in your own little world, then life can be a good thing, and it can be fun and exciting and interesting. And it's not going to be that way all the time. I'm going to have bad days and everybody's going to have bad days.
Yeah.
But, and what I was talking about in a separate podcast along the same topic with a guy was, he asked me what the meaning of life was, right? And, it's an unsatisfying answer, but the meaning of life is relativistic, right? It's determined by each one of us. Right. So if the meaning you give to life is that it's meaningless and it's full of pain and it's dark, then that is what life means to you. And there's people that, commit suicide over it, right? But if you find life, meaningful and enriching and deep, just by the simple things around you, then it's great and it's a beautiful thing. So
Joel, we all die. Memento mori, right? Remember death. So where do we come from and where do we go?
Yeah, there's a lot of different views on that. And the one thing that I always say on the show is that I don't know, right? A lot of people are afraid to say that, especially in our current climate, with things being polarized on the political level and on pretty much every other level, right? People like to believe that they know the answers to things. And the fact is they don't, and I don't, right? And so as a philosophy show, one thing I never do is I never make fun of somebody. I never make fun of any religion, right? Because here's what it boils down to. Could there be a God out there? Any God, whether it's any of the ones in your traditional religions or any one that we've never even conceived of that created everything and put us here and arranged everything to be the way it is. Yes, that's possible. There's no way of disproving that concept. So if there's no way of disproving it, why would I go and make fun of somebody for believing it? I can't, right? What I can do is look at scientific evidence that supports our view of reality. And another misconception, right, is, as a doctoral student, I like to tell people that you can have just as big a religious faith in science as you can in your typical religions. Wow. So a lot of people say, they want to make science the be all end all. That's not what science is. Science, all it does is disprove things that are false and provide support for other theories. But science never proves anything. Anybody that tells you science does prove something is not a scientist. Science supports theories with evidence. So, we've got a pretty good picture of the universe based off of the scientific evidence that we have. And so you can say, if you have religious beliefs that don't coincide with that evidence, there's a good chance they might be false, but I don't know for sure, So as a result, when we come back to the question, hey, where did we come from? What happens to us after we die? I can't say that I know. Do I have personal theories? I've got some ideas, but I don't really get too hung up in it.
What do you think, Saeed?
About where we go? It's a tough question to ask. Tough question to answer, bro. I mean, like Joel was saying, we don't actually have proof of existence after this life, but at the same time, is that what we want to focus on? Is that like what we want to base our lives around? What's going to happen after? Or should we just focus on what's happening right now and be present?
So you're saying stupid question.
No, I'm not saying stupid question.
Focus on something else.
I'm saying what we should focus on is that the current time is more important than what's going to happen later on. Just focus on what you're doing now. Enjoy your current life, and then the next life, it's just going to happen. And when it does happen, you'll find out. You shouldn't worry about it from now, because everyone worries about like how their conscience is going to be and like how it's going to turn out. It's like, oh, I made the wrong decision today, so this is going to be as like a bad mark on me after I die. But in reality, it's not a check and balance kind of thing. It's not like these are black marks and they're going to be forever on your list when you die. It's more of like bad things happen. Yeah, you do mistakes. You might do some bad things in this life, but you're also going to be doing good things, and those are the things that you should focus on, so that your mentality stays on that track, and then things will work out itself later on. I guess that's like the best way I can answer it. I don't know.
Wow. Thanks for asking me. I think I've had this. I'm sorry about that. I've had this theory. This is a genuine theory that I've had for the longest time. Every time I wake up, I always imagine, what if when I was asleep, I just transferred into a different body? And so every night when every day I wake up in a new body. Every day I wake up as a new person and living a different life with the memories of that person. I don't know. It sounds a bit sci-fi, but that's something I've always thought my whole life. And the more I learn about memory and about the things we know, the things that we for sure know for sure, the more I'm convinced that I'm just a traveler between human beings. I don't know. I mean, and I think dreams are a vessel. I think dreams are a vessel that connect you from one person to another. I guess that's just my theory. It's a bit out there. But good thing we have a professional philosopher. So what do you think about my theory of dreams and travel?
Yeah, so there's interesting aspects of it from a psychological viewpoint and from a philosophical viewpoint. Mm-hmm. From a philosophical viewpoint, there's the issue of continuity versus discontinuity, mm-hmm. which is kind of a ship of Theseus thought experiment, right? Which is where you have this ship, and over the course of 100 years, the ship, gets broken down and they replace boards here and there. And after 100 years, the ship doesn't have a single original board remaining. And you go, is it still the same ship? So what makes mm-hmm. a ship, right, essentially? Exactly. Is it the wood boards involved, mm-hmm. or is it, is it the blueprint of the ship? Is it the shape, the particular things, or is it the boards themselves? And what that leads you to eventually is, if you say, well, the first time you replace a board, it's a different ship, then for personality, what that means is every single second, you and I are a different person.
Wow.
And that sounds far out, but when you start thinking about it, every single cell in your body is replaced after 7 years, right? So mm-hmm. it's kind of like replacing boards on a ship. So is every 7 years, am I a completely different person? We'd like to think no, because we have memories and, relationships and experiences that predate that time period because of the continuity of consciousness. But from a physicalist standpoint, you go, well, none of the original material is there. Mm-hmm. So is the blueprint, the memories and the form and all of that sort of thing, what makes us us? From a psychological viewpoint, dreams, I've actually done a bit of research into them. It's sort of frowned upon to think about dreams in psychology until the past few years, because psychology started in dreams with Freud and Jung. And as psychology developed and a lot of their theories got debunked, a lot of psychologists said, okay, well, I'm going to steer clear of dreams because, those two Jobs kind of,
Geniuses.
made it weird for science. So we're just gonna not believe they exist. But the two relevant, I can't stop thinking about them, because as a philosopher, right, I think if an alien were to come to Earth, the weirdest thing about us would be that for 8 hours a day, we just sit there motionless and live these other lives in our heads, right? That's the weirdest thing. So you can't just ignore it. Like, you have to think about it. And there's been a lot of research into dreams. The two main theories are that, one, it's just your brain's garbage can, like, oh, a bunch of stuff happened and this is the stuff that doesn't matter, so we're just going to dump it. The other theory is that it's your brain trying to be a prediction machine, right? So you have stuff that happens during the day, and then your brain starts taking those things and saying, okay, well, what would happen if this situation happened a different way? Or what happens if it happened in the future? How would you react to it? And of course, it's pulling information from all kinds of different things, so it gets all screwed up. And then, there's certain parts of your brain that are shut down, getting cleaned and resting and stuff, so they're not operating right. And that's why dreams are sort of weird and strange. So, the idea that, hey, every day when I wake up, I'm a different person, it's not as far-fetched as you'd think philosophically, but it really depends on what your view of consciousness is. And at this point in time, there's no scientific consensus on what consciousness is or where it originates from in the brain. Whereas philosophers have thought about it, but philosophers can always say, well, this is a theory, but we don't know for sure, right?
Yeah. If you don't mind, just like two things I want to say. I wanna agree on the point about how we do become different people over time, and memories might make us think that we're not. And you can prove that to yourself, because whenever you try to relive an old memory, you just don't have the same experience as the first time you have it. So, for example, if now as an adult you play a video game that you used to play when as a kid, you're not going to enjoy it the same way you used to. It's not going to have the same feeling as when you were a kid experiencing it for the first time, looking at those graphics and be like, whoa, this is something amazing, and the story is just so interesting, and you're experiencing it for the first time. It's just like, this is a story I want to live over and over and over again. And the second point I want to mention is the sunlight hitting on your face, man, is just giving you this glow. All you're missing is like a halo over your head or something. So it was so weird, just like seeing the sun come up and then it's like smacking on his face, and he's just like,
it's a glow. It's a nice glow.
Yeah, it was really dark and rainy here earlier, but now the sun's coming out. So
weather in Buffalo.
Yeah, it's and so I've got a degree. I've got degrees in criminal justice and education, and now I'm working on psychology. And that's an interesting thing with the memory is, what you find from all three of those disciplines is that over time, people like to think of memories as these things that don't change, but really, every time you access a memory, it changes, and over time, it becomes a little bit less detailed, or the details of it change. So it's really not a reliable thing. Eyewitness testimony is just been established to be notoriously unreliable. And in psychology, very deep memories have been proven to be inaccurate a lot of times. And so I think for a lot of people that, the idea that if your memories are faulty, then how do you know who you were? And video games is a good example, right? Because lots of times if you haven't played a video game in 20 years, you do go back and you go, man, I remember the graphics being a lot better. I remember the story being better, right? Like, I remember watching Power Rangers as a kid and thinking it was super cool. And then like you grow up and you see a 6-year-old kid walking around behind the Megazord and you're like, oh, well, this sucked. They were just trying to sell me toys. So yeah, memories are notoriously malleable. And as we do change as people over the course of time. But yeah, the question is, do I change, or every time a change occurs, do I become a different person. And that's kind of the crux of the philosophical problem.
So when we become a different person, is that why we can't really relive the same experiences that we've had in the past the same way we did the first time? Because we're just like, so let's say, for going on the example of the video games, when you mentioned the graphics, well, these graphics are shit. When you look at them again when you're older, is it because you experienced better graphics growing up? So like after you've played that video game, you've seen the development of graphics, and then you're just your eyes and your brain is used to or comparing what you currently have to what you used to have. Or is it you?
Yeah. So yeah, from psychology and from education, I can tell you it's a novelty factor, right? So when you experience those things for the first time, not only are you seeing it for the first time, but also it's the technological context, right? They're cutting edge at the time. So it's not just that you're seeing the game itself for the first time, but the graphics themselves are also new, because that's the thing is if you were to play a video game from the 90s for the first time today, you would be able to know that the graphics sucked because you've had access and experience to other things over the course of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all prior knowledge, right? There's a lot of educational theory that talks about how people come to learn and know things. But basically what it boils down to is there's no knowledge outside of prior knowledge, which is another reason that the more you know about a bunch of different things, the easier it becomes to learn new things. I like to tell people that I'm not good at much, but what I am good at is, I'm a professional learner because, I'm not a great musician, or I'm not a great painter, I'm not a great author or podcaster or any of these things, right? But the more things that I've done, the more it gives you insight into other things. And so you come across things that maybe you haven't experienced before, but you've experienced something like it or something close to it. And so when you go to learn that new thing, it's a little bit easier for you than somebody who was completely in the dark, right? Same thing with video games, right? Maybe, somebody who's up to date on video games is going to be a great gamer. But there's going to be a big difference between somebody who, hasn't played a video game in 10 years and somebody who's never played a video game, right? So I'm that guy that hasn't played a video game in 10 years, just in every aspect of my life, right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
love that, Joe.
All right, so I'm not going to be great, but I'm gonna be able to pick it up eventually.
That's not bad, and your brain remembers it in a weird way. The weird motor memory, the weird, subconscious memory. You just keep it in you somehow, somewhere, and sometimes it just takes you some time to play with something, and then you remember a song you haven't played in a few decades, and like multiply it over time. You get older. The more things you pick up, you're going to live a life that's so colorful. I picked up many things. I mean, you, Joel, it seems like you love life. That's my kind of assumption from when I see you, and the things you're just curious about many different philosophies and modalities of life. And so you're the perfect person to ask, like, would you want to live forever?
Yeah. I don't think so. It's interesting. I think that the key to living a good life, right, is being humble about things, right? Because the biggest thing that holds people back, and it held me back when I was younger, right? When I was a teenager, when you're in that age frame, you're always worried about your peers. Like, what do my friends think? I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to do anything wrong, right? And the biggest thing that helped me grow as a person was just realizing, like, you know what? Who cares if my music sucks? Like, I like doing it, so I'm going to do it. And you know what? I'll release it. And if people like it and want to listen to it, great. And if they don't, well, that's great too. And if they're going to say a bunch of crap, like, I'm just not going to read comments, And same thing with anything, right? Like, just do the stuff that you like to do and don't worry about it being perfect and don't worry about making mistakes, because that's just part of being human. You're not going to be perfect and you're going to make mistakes. Similarly, I think dying is is part of being human, right? So if we didn't die, that, in theory, there's only one way you could go. That would raise you to a level of being a god, but that's not practical, right? Because any theory of immortality for humans would revolve around defeating senescence, which is aging. But there's no way to make us impervious to the dangers of the universe, right? In 5 billion years, the sun's going to explode and envelop the earth.
Yep.
So you could defeat aging, but eventually that's going to kill you. Oh, well, you get off a planet, you get to the next planet, right? Well, you can planet hop for the next 100 billion years, and then every star in the universe is out, and you're dead. Like, so it's not just humans, it's the universe that has a death date as well, right?
Wow.
And so this idea of immortality is, I think that it's flawed from the start. So it's not really an option at all, but I think that even if it was, from an aging standpoint, like if I were to say, yeah, I want to live forever, really all that does is guarantee me a violent death down the road rather than a death of old age. So, there's some give and take there. Would I like to live 1,000 years? Yeah, I think so. I think that might be the upper end, though. I think you get to that point, and another thing that we don't, we hear about the anti-aging thing a lot today, and one thing that we don't consider is the psychology of it. We think about the body, we talk about the cells. Okay, well, if we can keep the cells healthy, we can keep the whole body healthy, and people could live forever. Well, the human brain is adapted to living 100 years, right? And we can already see the kind of things that happen when we try to work against those adaptations with like social media, right? And how it hijacks things. And there's a lot of things in the modern context, the modern environment that hijack our brain and give us real difficulties. And so I think that if we were to live significantly beyond our natural lifespan, we'd start to have some significant psychological difficulties because we're not adapted to that kind of frame of reference.
Wow. So it basically become not human in a way, just because the way we think would be different.
Ali, we just lose
our
minds,
I think
yeah,
I think so.
Yep. We just become different. I mean, they're trying to make us live older and older and older, right? And try to fight the aging process. So who knows how long we're going to live to, Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's conflicting data on that. I think that most of the authoritative stuff is saying, listen, 120 to maybe 150 is really maxing it out, and I would think from a cognitive standpoint, even if you were able to avoid, having buildups of tau plaques and, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all that stuff, even if you were able to maintain your psychological health, I think there would come a point where, you wouldn't be able to deal with it. And I think it would be about that time range.
Yeah, and I also think that if I live forever, but then Saeed doesn't, then it means I'm going to lose Saeed. And that would make me very upset, and
you'd have to do this podcast by yourself, man.
I know. How sad would that be, right? I mean, just think about that, and I just think about if you keep going forward, all the trauma that just keeps adding to your psyche, and I think,
bro, I think I would get bored. Simple enough. I'll just get.
You would get bored if it went on forever. I'm not worried about the boredom. I'm worried just about all the chaos that might happen, the unintended effects of living forever. Just all those.
Would you not want to try it out, Ali? Though, would you not want to see what these effects have on you?
Okay, so
explore your mind in the chaos.
See, I would, but under one condition. If I could have technology that can change my memory, so that when you pass away, I can just edit it to forget about you. Then, yes, I would like to continue to live forever because.
This is an interesting topic, Ali. You're talking about reprogramming memories. Joel, what do you think about reprogramming memories?
Yeah, so I think that it's a tricky road to head down. I think that you are onto something, that would be the way to continue living on, because part of the aging process, they've looked at it psychologically, and they've seen a big factor is people, as they get older, it's just this baggage that accumulates, right? It's everything they have, like you said, every death you experience, every world crisis you go through is just throwing something else on your back, and you can't forget it, and eventually it just weighs you down to the point where when your body's breaking down, your mind's also saying, yeah, you know what, this is probably enough, like we're done, let's go. And so if you got to the point where the body didn't wear down, you'd still be adding all that stuff, the deaths that you experience and the world events that you would experience. It's still all there. So yeah, would you have to wipe your mind to forget about it? That might be one way of dealing with it. I think it would be a very, very dangerous way of dealing with it. I think a more healthy way of dealing with it would be a natural way of doing it, which would be engaging with younger people. I think that's the problem that a lot of us have, is that we establish friends when we're young and we grow up and we all go through the same life stages. And then when we start to lose those people, then it feels like our life is over. Right. But I think that when you start sort of reaching out and, making friends with people of all ages and of all backgrounds and stuff, then when you start missing pieces, you can't replace those people. But if you have, people from a range of ages and backgrounds, it doesn't feel like your cohort, your tribe of people is dying out and therefore you're dying out. It feels like you still have something you can contribute to, and some way that you're affecting the world as it is. And so, I mentioned younger people. I think that, because we were talking about, aging, being on the far end of life.
Yeah.
But as a younger person, I think it's important to engage with older people, right? The co-host on my podcast, he's 65 years old. And, it's just good to have a wide, I say in America, we've got a lot of problems in America, right? But at least overtly, we're trying to address the ones like racism and sexism and those sorts of things. Are we successful? We're not really great at it, right? But at least we're paying lip service to the fact that racism and sexism are problems.
Yeah.
The one that we don't talk about is ageism, right?
100%.
Which is where,
wow.
Whereas, where that, hey, if you're old, we're going to discriminate against you, and nobody's going to consider that wrong, right? So if you're an old guy and you go to apply for a job, we're going to say, we're going to pick somebody younger, and nobody's going to do anything about it, right? And that's really a shame, because, older people have things to offer, and it's kind of like prisoners, right? You look at prison systems throughout the rest of the world, and they're focused on rehabilitation. And if that's your focus, then you can reintroduce these people into society and have them be productive members. Whereas in the US, it's all retribution, right? Like, we're going to punish these people. And then you want to know what? When you get out of prison, we're going to continue punishing you. You can't get a job. You can't vote. You can't contribute in any way. So what do? You go back to crime, right? It's kind of the same way with old people, where it's like, you know what, you're not a productive member of society anymore. And so then they say, oh, well, I guess I can't do anything. And then they sit on the couch and they die. You have to give people things to do. You have to make them feel like they're part of the world.
You have to reintegrate them into society.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, exactly.
And Joel, so we were talking about baggage. And so you've been a decorated Army veteran. And first of all, can I ask, where did you serve, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I so decorated is a stretch. I've got a couple Army Achievement medals, but I never went overseas. So it was all training stuff. I got one medal for I found an unexploded World War II munition, and then I had to move some stuff around so it could be removed. So they had to shut down the whole base and, make sure that nobody got hurt and that sort of thing. But and then another one was a training mission where somebody got sick, and the job I had was very specific. I drove a piece of equipment that would pick up like container boxes and stuff. So the one medal was there was a giant unexploded bomb and they had to get rid of it, but there was this container that was too close. So I had to drive out and move the container. All right, here's your medal. Right. The other one, it was a training mission, and the person who drove the vehicle that I drove got sick or was AWOL or something. And so they didn't have anybody to fulfill that job. And so I was just driving around. And I said, hey, do you guys need any help? They said, well, do you have anybody that drives one of these? I said, oh, yeah, I do. And they're like, oh, you mind unloading some trucks? Sure. So for 2 weeks, that's all I did was unload trucks. And then we went to go home, and they had like an award ceremony, and they didn't even tell me. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, report. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And they were like, so essentially, if you didn't show up, there would have been 10,000 soldiers that like didn't have food.
Wow.
They're like, because nobody knew how to drive the thing. And I'm sure they'd figure it out. Somebody who didn't know how to drive it would get in there and figure out the controls and whatnot. But yeah, so 2 medals, they're both in training circumstances. Nothing big, but there's traumatic parts about it still. For the one exercise, it was in Wisconsin in February. It was -20. We had a 4-man group. The truck only had 3 seats. So I sat in the back, the back of an open truck, driving 40 miles an hour, -20.
Oh my God.
Getting my arms froze up to my elbows. I couldn't move my fingers for 45 minutes afterwards. Training exercise where you're shooting chalk rounds, which is, they tell you it's just like paintball, but, a paintball gun's going to shoot at 600 feet per second. Whereas what you're doing is shooting chalk out of an M16 at 3,600 feet per second. So it feels real. It feels like a real firefight when you're out there shooting the thing. So yeah, there's some cool stuff, but nothing big like anybody else has done. But
what is a traumatic experience you faced?
So my particular basic training experience was a little rough. Because they started doing this program where they used to have all the combat soldiers trained in combat bases like Fort Bragg, and then they'd have all the support personnel trained in support bases like, Fort Jackson. They used to call it Relax in Jackson, right? Because It was just, if you're a truck driver or whatever, like you go there and it's not a big deal. Well, right before I joined, the Army did this thing where they were like, hey, we want to make sure that everybody knows how to fight. So we're going to start switching people up. We'll send combat drill sergeants to the support schools and support drill sergeants to the combat schools. So my drill sergeant was a ranger, and he was a little unstable, and he was about to get out, so he just really didn't care. So he was particularly hard on us, where he wouldn't let us sleep at night. I don't think I ever slept more than 3 hours in a stretch for 10 weeks. And he'd always make us serve the food. And so we'd serve the food to all the other soldiers, and he'd make us give them like twice as much, so that when we got to the end, there wasn't anything for us. So like on a regular basis, I was eating like 3 pieces of lettuce and a spoonful of rice and like a little chicken wing. And that was it for like 3 meals a day. And then on top of that, you're just constantly doing physical exercise. He's showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning and saying, hey, we're going to do push-ups for an hour and a half. And so, that's, speaking of dreams, like that's something that sticks with you. Like I still to this day dream, right, that I'm in basic training. The simulated combat was similar, right? They build whole towns, and they fill them with smoke, and they fill them with enemy combatants, and they fill them with civilians. They send you in there with these, guns with the chalk rounds, and you have to differentiate between friend and foe. And, if you get shot, these guys are coming out with holes in their arms, and they're all purple and bloody and stuff. And so you're shooting back at people and doing stuff. So, it's funny because your human, the brain can't differentiate too well between what's real and what's fake. There's your prefrontal cortex that knows, right? Oh, this is a training thing. Like this isn't real. And hey, this one is only going to last for 10 weeks. And then, things will go back to being all right. But the primal part of your brain says, no, my life is in danger. Like, this is a big deal.
Wow.
And that sticks with you over time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it just makes you think about all the people who served in the military.
Yeah.
You were talking about people who like get older, they maybe get left out, and people who go to jail. But I also think people who served in the military also, when they return, there's a lot of occasions where they can really fit in back into society. I mean, we've seen this a lot of times, and yeah, I know it's one of those things that's kind of upsetting, you know, because they're serving, they're putting themselves out there for their country, and then when they come back to their country, there isn't really a place for them.
Ali, what do you think we should do for that?
Yeah, it's difficult, you know, because the suicide rates are skyrocketed among veterans. The mental health issues are skyrocketed, and I think that, you know, there are some things we can do on the societal side to help them out. You know, the VA healthcare system has been a mess for a while. I think there's some things that could be straightened out there. But I think the sad truth of the matter is there's some things that a human being can experience and go through that can't be fixed, you know? And, you know, some of the things that these guys have seen, you know, there's ways of, through healthcare and through medication and, you know, through counseling programs and reintegration, you can help them with, but there's some things that people have seen that are going to be with them the rest of their lives, you know? So, I think that there's a lot of people out there doing their best. And I think there's areas that can be improved on, you know, especially the VA healthcare system. But, you know, it's hard to say it like it is, but there are some things that, you know, there's some things that stick with everybody, right? And that's another thing that can help or hinder you, right? It can inform your view of the world. If you look at these things and all you're thinking about is how hard they are, how terrible they are, right? Then you become very scared of life. You have a very dark view on it. What's better is to look at those situations and try to give them a positive spin. And it can be very difficult, right? But, you know, if you can think about a time in your life where you went through something more difficult, or if you think about somebody else in the world who's going through something more difficult, it can help you in the experience you're in, right?
Yeah.
That's what I always told people when, you know, during COVID, when they didn't want to wear masks and stuff, right? Oh, this is so irritating. I'm like, no, having your hands frozen up to your elbows is irritating, yes, exactly. Right? You know, and that I still did that with a smile on my face because I knew that there's other soldiers in other parts of the world who are going through even worse things, right? There's always somebody who has it worse off than you. And, you know, if you're just thankful that you're not that guy, you know, and you can think about the good experiences that you've had in life and other parts of your life that were terrible that are now over, that you don't have to deal with, it can help you have a more growth-oriented mindset for your own life and give you some positive ways to deal with the challenges you face.
Joel, what do you think about ketamine therapy?
I don't know if you've heard about I haven't. Yes, I've heard of it. I haven't looked into it too much. I think that there's a lot of usefulness for it. I think that especially here in America, we're still very gun shy of psychedelic drugs and restricted substances. And I think that they actually have a lot to offer from the scientific literature that I've reviewed. Now, again, this is based on, you know, there's individual aspects to it. I think, you know, everybody has in their own neuronal makeup, their own chemistry, and I think that it's very important that these things are studied in a controlled way, you know, in a way where people have assistance. But I think that there's a lot of use for them, and I'm hoping to see more research done in this way because I think that it can help a lot of people.
I'm very hopeful about the future in terms of treatment. I really think, yes, there are things that have happened in the past you can't change, but I do think the power of the mind is incredible, and you can really change your perspective and the stories you tell on these traumas. And we can do it. And, and with all the money that goes into the military, some of it can go into the healthcare system too for the people who can't come back. And with enough treatment, I think you can make them a lot more able to return to society and fit into society. I've always wondered, Joel, you hear the phrase ignorance is bliss. And do you think being smart makes you sad? Do you think I'd be happier if I was stupid or if I had a goldfish brain and I was just living moment to moment?
Yes. I think that you would be smart. I think that you would be happier, right? I think that
Jeez, what am I doing this for then?
Yeah. So there's a caveat. I'm going to get there. But no, I think that people who put their head in the sand have the potential to be happier than people who think deeply about things. Mm-hmm. But I think that when you do that, you're missing an integral part of the human experience and what it means to be alive, right?
Yeah.
We're put in a very special place in the universe, right? We have mental faculties that allow us to look at, reality and consider it in a way that, as far as we know, isn't present anywhere else, right? It's not to say that it isn't, but it doesn't appear to be. So it's really a missed opportunity to not think about these things. And I think that there's a very important distinction to make between happiness and fulfillment, mm-hmm. right? Happiness is a transitory state. It's not something that you can constantly live in. So you can be happy in a hedonistic way, which is to say, hey, I'm just going to focus on, anything that makes me feel good. And you can say that that's happiness, but it's not fulfillment, right? Fulfillment is finding something that makes you feel like your life has been worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that only comes from feeling like you've put some effort into it, so that's the short answer is, there's happiness. Sure, you might be happier if you were ignorant, but I think the happiness itself is misconstrued and overblown by the average person in a lot of ways.
And if you don't mind me asking, Joel, my last question would be, what do you know about optimistic nihilism, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, we just did an episode on nihilism not too long ago, and it's a difficult philosophy. It's not something that I have. It's not something that I think about too much. I think it's almost hard to be optimistic if you're nihilistic. I think optimistic nihilism is almost borderline absurdism. you're
Insanity.
You're kind of, mm-hmm. You're kind of saying, well, there's no meaning, but yeah, that's all right. And which is different from what I was saying at the beginning of the episode, right? I think that when you look at meaning, I think people want there to be an overarching meaning, right? That there's a God and that they're going to go to heaven and that there's an objective thing out there. I think that the reality of it is more relativistic, right? Each one of us makes our own meaning, right? And I can make meaning of the world by saying that it's dark and depressing and painful, or I can make meaning of the world by saying that it's interesting and that it's beautiful and that it's it's cool in that way. But I think to say that there's no meaning at all, right? There's no objective meaning out there, and that my subjective internal perceptions also don't mean anything, right? And may not even exist. That's part of nihilism too, is like that maybe this doesn't even exist at all, right? But then to say, but it's all right, I think that putting that positive spin on it is necessarily saying that your subjective conceptions and your subjective meaning making has some value. So it's kind of a difficult thing to address.
Yeah, tricky question, Said.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
It is, because you're basically saying nothing has meaning, but somehow you give it meaning. You know?
Yeah. You know, you're saying, yeah, nothing has any meaning, but I'm upbeat about it. It's like, well, if you're upbeat about it, then you're kind of saying that there's something there, you know. That's a problem that I have with nihilism and by extension atheism, right? I think that in my honest opinion, atheism is the least profitable way to view the universe, right? Because of what I said at the beginning, I can never disprove that there's a God, and we have to think about God outside of the traditional context. And so I think agnosticism is a much more preferable way to go, because that's just saying I don't know. That's literally what the word means, is I don't know, right? And so it's a lot more beneficial to say I don't know. I think it's sort of arrogant to say I know that there's no God, right? Well, that seems like that could, you know, what's the harm in saying I don't know, you know? I think nihilism is sort of the same way. Nihilism says there is no meaning. And it's like, well, wouldn't you just be better off saying I don't know if there's meaning, or subjectively from my own perspective there is meaning, even if there is no inherent meaning in the greater universe, you know?
You know nothing for sure. That's the one thing we know, is that we don't know what we know.
Yep.
Wow, right. Said, what do you think about that one?
There's been a lot of knowing and not knowing, and questions and expressions and emotions, and bro, I don't know. I'm just fucking lost at this point.
Well, this has been a philosophy podcast. I want to show you something, Joel, right here. I got my matrix right here. I got my Buddha right here. I don't know if you can see my Buddha.
Nice.
Look at that beautiful guy. And look at that beautiful matrix.
Awesome.
I live in philosophy, man. We live a philosophical life. That's all that matters, right? Is to think.
Ali, do you know what you don't know?
Not sure about that.
Good answer.
Another podcast made to the show. Mr. Worldwide. Thank you, Joel, for coming on the show. Joel Bouchard. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? And is there anything you want to plug at this time?
No. Thanks for having me on. If you want to listen to my show, it's From Nowhere to Nothing. It's a philosophy podcast. We talk about a lot of stuff, kind of like this. If you're ever interested in listening to my music, you can just Google my name, but that's about it.
Perfect. Well, signing out. Ciao. Woo!